Episode 11, Cosmic Consciousness. This chapter is clearly one of my favorites, and though utterly surreal, it focuses on what the human mind is capable of and how one can directly experience illuminated states of consciousness that are usually inaccessible. A few mornings later, I made my way to my master's empty sitting room. I planned to meditate, but my laudable purpose was unshared by disobedient thoughts. They scattered like birds before the hunter. "Bakunda!" Sri Yukteswar's voice sounded from a distant inner balcony. I felt as rebellious as my thoughts. "Master always urges me to meditate," I muttered to myself. "He should not disturb me when he knows why I came to this room." He summoned me again. I remained obstinately silent. The third time, his tone held rebuke. "Sir, I am meditating," I shouted protestingly. "I know you are meditating," my guru called out, "with your mind distributed like leaves in the storm. Come here to me." Snubbed and exposed, I made my way sadly to his side. "Poor boy, the mountains couldn't give you what you wanted." Master spoke caressively, comfortingly. His calm gaze was unfathomable. "Your heart's desire shall be fulfilled." Sri Yukteswar seldom indulged in riddles. I was bewildered. He struck gently on my chest above the heart. My body became immovably rooted. Breath was drawn out of my lungs as if by some huge magnet. Soul and mind instantly lost their physical bondage and streamed out like a fluid-piercing light from my every pore. The flesh was as though dead, yet in my intense awareness I knew that never before had I been fully alive. My sense of identity was no longer narrowly confined to a body, but embraced the circumambient atoms. People on distant streets seemed to be moving gently over my own remote periphery. The roots of plants and trees appeared through a dim transparency of the soil. I discerned the inward flow of their sap. The whole vicinity lay bare before me. My ordinary frontal vision was now changed to a vast spherical sight, simultaneously all perceptive. Through the back of my head I saw men strolling far down Raigat Road, and noticed also a white cow who was leisurely approaching. When she reached the space in front of the open ashram gate, I observed her with my two physical eyes. As she passed by, behind the brick wall, I saw her clearly still. All objects within my panoramic gaze trembled and vibrated like quick motion pictures. My body, Master's, the pillared courtyard, the furniture and floor, the trees and sunshine occasionally became violently agitated, until all melted into a luminescent sea, even as sugar crystals thrown into a glass of water dissolve after being shaken. The unifying light alternated with materializations of form, the metamorphoses revealing the law of cause and effect in creation. An oceanic joy broke upon calm, endless shores of my soul. The Spirit of God, I realized, is exhaustless bliss. His body is countless tissues of light. A swelling glory within me began to envelop towns, continents, the earth, solar and stellar systems, tenuous nebulae, and floating universes. The entire cosmos, gently luminous, like a city seen far at night, glimmered within the infinitude of my being. The sharply etched global outlines faded somewhat at the farthest edges, and there I could see a mellow radiance ever undiminished. It was indescribably subtle. The planetary pictures were formed of a grosser light. The divine dispersion of rays poured from an eternal source, blazing into galaxies, transfigured with ineffable auras. Again and again, I saw the creative beams condense into constellations, then resolve into sheets of transparent flame. By rhythmic reversion, sextillion worlds passed into diaphanous luster. Fire became firmament. I cognized the center of the Empyrean as a point of intuitive perception in my heart. Irradiating splendor issued from my nucleus to every part of the universal structure. Blissful Amrita, the nectar of immortality, pulsed through me with a quicksilver-like fluidity. The creative voice of God I heard resounding as Om, the vibration of the cosmic motor. Suddenly the breath returned to my lungs. With a disappointment almost unbearable, I realized that my infinite immensity was lost. Once more, I was limited to the humiliating cage of a body, not easily accommodative to the spirit. Like a prodigal child, I had run away from my macrocosmic home and imprisoned myself in a narrow microcosm. My guru was standing motionless before me. I started to drop at his holy feet in gratitude for the experience in cosmic consciousness which I had long passionately sought. He held me upright and spoke calmly, unpretentiously. You must not get overdrunk with ecstasy. Much work yet remains for you in the world. Come, let us sweep the balcony floor, then we shall walk by the Ganges. I fetched a broom. Master I knew was teaching me the secret of balanced living. The soul must stretch over the cosmogonic abysses while the body performs its daily duties. When we set out later for a stroll, I was still entranced in unspeakable rapture. I saw our bodies as two astral pictures moving over a road by the river whose essence was sheer light. It is the Spirit of God that actively sustains every form and force in the universe. Yet He is transcendental and aloof in the blissful uncreated void beyond the worlds of vibratory phenomena. Master explained. Saints who realize their divinity even while in the flesh know a similar twofold existence. Conscientiously engaging in earthly work, they yet remain immersed in an inward beatitude. The Lord has created all men from the limitless joy of His being, though they are painfully cramped by the body. God nevertheless expects that souls made in His image shall ultimately rise above all sense identifications and reunite with Him. The cosmic vision left many permanent lessons. By daily stilling my thoughts, I could win release from the delusive conviction that my body was a mass of flesh and bones traversing the hard soil of matter. The breath and the restless mind I saw were like storms which lashed the ocean of light into waves of material forms, earth, sky, human beings, animals, birds, trees. No perception of the infinite as one light could be had except by calming these storms. As often as I silenced the two natural tumults, I beheld the multitudinous waves of creation melt into one lucent sea. Even as the waves of the ocean, their tempests subsiding, serenely dissolve into unity. A master bestows the divine experience of cosmic consciousness when his disciple, by meditation, has strengthened his mind to a degree where the vast vistas would not overwhelm him. The experience can never be given through one's mere intellectual willingness or open-mindedness. Only adequate enlargement by yoga practice and devotional bhakti can prepare the mind to absorb the liberating shock of omnipresence. It comes with a natural inevitability to the sincere devotee. His intense craving begins to pull at God with an irresistible force. The Lord, as the cosmic vision, is drawn by the seeker's magnetic ardor into his range of consciousness. Skeptical analysis. Although Yogananda's description about cosmic consciousness is effusive and filled with sonorous evocations about the divine, it seems obvious that the experience was transformative. What makes his account so compelling, even if he can be pardoned for some of his turgid prose, is that it dovetails with other mystics from around the world who have had similar out-of-body ecstasies. Yogananda's momentous rapture reminds one of modern NDE accounts, where dying patients are transported to a heavenly realm and enter a dark tunnel and see a scintillating light and more. While we may doubt or question how Yogananda ultimately interpreted his experience of cosmic consciousness, I am of the strong opinion that Yogananda did indeed have a mystical vision and that his guru was the chief catalyst behind it. I don't say this lightly or to elevate Yogananda's spiritual status, but only to highlight what consciousness is capable of producing under the right conditions and given the right cues. This doesn't mean by extension that such illuminations were not brain-induced or beyond the ken of neuroscience to understand them. Rather, it is to realize that extraordinary states of awareness are possible and that yoga, meditation, prayer, and other methods are powerful tools to unleash hidden corridors of the human mind. Yogananda provides us with the contextual setting for where, when, how, and why he was ready for such a transcendent illumination. First, he had been thwarted in his efforts to run away and meet Himalayan masters. Second, he met his guru and began regular and guided sadhana. Third, he was slightly reprimanded by Ram Gopal, the sleepless saint, for his continued pilgrimages when what he needed was back at his home ashram. These factors, plus Yogananda's intense faith and desire, served as tipping points in his spiritual evolution. His emotional and mental kindling were preset, and thus, when Sri Yukteswar tapped him on the chest, above his heart, it served as an immediate unleashing of his spiritual potential. Yogananda, to his credit, provides us with enough physical clues about what transpired that we can better understand how such a wondrous experience could happen and why others, in different mystical traditions, may have had similar excursions. Notice that right after his guru touches him, Yogananda talks about how his body freezes up, which is so intense that he became immovably rooted. This feeling of physical paralysis is a common precursor in those undergoing a mystical ecstasy, the feeling of numbness in the body, but specifically in the peripheral nervous system, is, according to the Indian sages, a preliminary acid test which confirms that the numinous exteriorization is genuine. Yogananda then mentions that breath was drawn out of my lungs as if by some huge magnet. Soul and mind instantly lost their physical bondage and streamed out like a fluid-piercing light from my every pore. This sounds very reminiscent of what happens when one has a near-death experience, though his description is more vivid and detailed and most likely has been garnished in the final editing process before publication. His account also sounds remarkably similar to reports from those who have ingested psychedelic drugs, such as LSD-25, mescaline, MDMA, ketamine, and DMT. Aldous Huxley, in his groundbreaking tome, The Doors of Perception, 1954, writing less than a decade after Autobiography of a Yogi was published, speaks in enraptured tones after ingesting mescaline. I continued to look at the flowers, and in their living light I seemed to detect the qualitative equivalent of breathing, but of a breathing without returns to a starting point, with no recurrent ebbs, but only a repeated flow from beauty to heightened beauty, from deeper to ever deeper meaning. Words like grace and transfiguration came to my mind, And this, of course, was what, among other things, they stood for. My eyes traveled from the rose to the carnation, and from the feathery incandescence to the smooth scrolls of sentient amethyst, which were the iris, the beatific vision, Satchitananda. Being awareness bliss, for the first time I understood. Not on the verbal level, not by the inchoate hints or at a distance, but precisely and completely what those prodigious syllables referred to. And then I remembered a passage I had read in one of Suzuki's essays. What is the Dharma body of Buddha? The Dharma body of the Buddha is another way of saying mind, suchness, the void, the Godhead. The question is asked in a Zen monastery by an earnest and bewildered novice. And with the prompt irrelevance of one of the Marx brothers, the master answers, the hedge at the bottom of the garden. And the man who realizes this truth, the novice dubiously inquires, what, may I ask, is he? Groucho gives him a whack over the shoulders with his staff and answers, a golden-haired lion. It had been, when I read it, only a vaguely pregnant piece of nonsense. Now it was all as clear as day, as evident as Euclid. Of course, the Dharma body of the Buddha was the hedge at the bottom of the garden. At the same time, and no less obviously, it was these flowers. It was anything that I, or rather the blessed not I, released for a moment from my throttling embrace, cared to look at. The books, for example, with which my study walls were lined. Like the flowers, they glowed when I looked at them, with brighter colors, a profounder significance. Red books like rubies, emerald books, books bound in white jade, books of agate, of aquamarine, of yellow topaz, lapis lazuli, books whose color was so intense, so intrinsically meaningful that they seemed to be on the point of leaving the shelves to thrust themselves more insistently on my attention. Gerald Edelman, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist, quotes Emily Dickinson in his preface to Wider Than the Sky, The Phenomenal Gift of Consciousness, where she shares a vision of consciousness that resonates with mystics east and west. The brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side, the one the other will contain with ease, and you beside. The brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them, blue to blue, the one the other will absorb as sponges, buckets do. The brain is just the weight of God, for heft them, pound for pound, and they will differ, if they do, a syllable from sound. Yogananda is in good company when he euphorically writes, the Spirit of God, I realized, is exhaustless bliss. His body is countless tissues of light. A swelling glory within me began to envelop towns, continents, the earth, solar and stellar systems, tenuous nebulae, and floating universes. The entire cosmos, gently luminous, like a city seen afar at night, glimmered within the infinitude of my being. The sharply etched global outlines faded somewhat at the farthest edges. There I could see a mellow radiance, ever undiminished. It was indescribably subtle. The planetary pictures were formed of a grosser light. For instance, compare the preceding passages with Richard Maurice Bucke's introduction to his book on cosmic consciousness. It was in the early spring, at the beginning of his 36th year. He and two friends had spent the evening reading Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, Browning, and especially Whitman. They parted at midnight, and he had a long drive in a hansom. It was an English city. His mind, deeply under the influence of the ideas, images, and emotions called up by the reading and talk of the evening, was calm and peaceful. He was in a state of quiet, almost passive enjoyment. All at once, without warning of any kind, He found himself wrapped around as if it were by a flame-colored cloud. For an instant he thought of fire, some sudden conflagration in the great city. The next he knew that the light was within himself. Directly afterwards came upon him a sense of exultation, of immense joyousness, accompanied or immediately followed by an intellectual illumination quite impossible to describe. Into his brain streamed one momentary lightning flash of the Brahmic splendor which has ever since lightened his life. Upon his heart fell one drop of Brahmic bliss, leaving thenceforward for always an aftertaste of heaven. Among other things he did not come to believe, he saw and knew that the cosmos is not dead matter but a living presence, that the soul of man is immortal, that the universe is so built and ordered that without any peradventure all things work together for the good of each and all, that the foundation principle of the world is what we call love, and that the happiness of everyone is in the long run absolutely certain. He claims that he learned more within the few seconds during which the illumination lasted than in previous months or even years of study, and that he learned much that no study could ever have taught. The illumination itself continued not more than a few seconds, but its effects proved ineffaceable. It was impossible for him ever to forget what he at that time saw and knew. Neither did he or could he ever doubt the truth of what was then presented to his mind. The skeptic who has not had such experiences will undoubtedly look askance at such narratives, impugning their veridicality with the tiresome trope that they are just brain hallucinations, forgetting in the process that even our own waking state is the product of symphonic neural activity. What we take to be real at any moment is also predicated upon cerebral processes for which we have no direct access. Therefore, given how little we know about consciousness and why it emerges, it behooves us not to prematurely dismiss mystical encounters and what they can teach us about our evolutionary heritage. The danger is when we mistakenly believe that our inner subjective experiences can only be interpreted along already given theological trajectories. Yes, human experience is far-reaching and has many unexplored byways, but we do ourselves no service when we ad hoc dismiss alternate interpretations too early and too easily because they contravene our religious upbringings.